I came to fix her AC, but the real heat was between us. Emotional goal, establish intrigue, admiration, and subtle tension while introducing the characters and their dynamic. Narrative and sensory detail. It started like any other service call, the kind I'd done hundreds of times. A broken AC unit, a humid summer afternoon, a few tools in my bag. But the moment I rang the doorbell, I realized this wasn't going to be ordinary. She opened the door, and for a brief second, I simply stared. She was in her early 40s, exuding quiet confidence and effortless grace. Her hair, the color of warm chestnut, caught the sunlight streaming through the doorway, giving it an almost ethereal glow. She wore a simple, comfortable dress, yet it accentuated her natural elegance. Nothing flashy, just the way she carried herself. But it was her eyes that stopped me. Calm, measured, but carrying a quiet vulnerability, a flicker of something unsaid. "Hello?" she said, her voice smooth, slightly husky from the heat. A polite smile, but with a hint of fatigue. "I'm really hoping this AC isn't too complicated." I offered my own smile, leaning slightly forward in that professional but friendly way. "Let's see what we're dealing with," I said, stepping inside. Immediately, the hum of the malfunctioning AC filled the house, a low, persistent vibration that made the warm air almost tangible. As I knelt to examine the unit, I could feel her presence nearby. She lingered in the doorway, subtly shifting her weight, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the ozone from the AC, a surprising and oddly comforting contrast. My hands, already busy with wires and coils, felt the quiet awareness of her watching, her curiosity about what I was doing. She spoke again, her tone light but carrying unspoken undertones. "Do you think it'll take long?" There was no impatience, just a gentle tension, a curiosity about both the work and the man doing it. I looked up at her, and for a heartbeat, our eyes met and held. Nothing was said, yet something passed between us, a subtle recognition, like two people noticing a shared rhythm. I nodded reassuringly. "I'll have it running soon. Don't worry." The house was warm, the sun filtering through large windows, lighting up dust motes that danced lazily in the air. She stepped aside, letting me move freely, and in that small gesture, I caught another flicker of her personality, considerate, mindful, self-aware. When I adjusted a panel and my elbow accidentally brushed hers, we both flinched slightly, then smiled, embarrassed but aware of the unspoken spark. By the time the AC unit began to hum normally, I was already aware that this was no ordinary service call. There was something in her presence, subtle, captivating, that drew me in, quietly insisting that this encounter would linger long after the heat of the summer passed. Romantic cues, mutual observation and curiosity. Slightly longer than necessary eye contact. Subtle warmth in gestures and tone of voice. A shared, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of attraction. Emotional goal, deepen intrigue and begin building subtle emotional and physical connection through shared space, playful tension, and observation. Narrative and sensory detail. With the AC unit humming steadily, the immediate crisis was over, but there was a lingering energy in the room neither of us could ignore. I continued checking the components, adjusting screws and panels, but my awareness kept drifting back to her. She had moved closer, perching on the edge of a chair nearby, casually watching, yet her gaze held a quiet fascination, the kind that made small, ordinary gestures feel intimate. "You really know your way around these things," she said, voice soft but amused, as if daring me to respond with humility. I glanced up, catching the curve of a small smile, and felt an almost magnetic pull in that simple exchange. "Years of practice," I replied lightly, though my hands were still dusty from the unit. She tilted her head, as if considering whether I was joking or serious, her fingers tracing the rim of the chair absent-mindedly. It was a subtle movement, but it drew my attention, the kind of unconscious gesture that makes someone seem suddenly closer than they are. As I tightened a panel, our hands brushed accidentally. A small, fleeting contact, but enough to send a spark of awareness through both of us. Neither withdrew immediately. She looked at me, eyes wide for a fraction of a second, a blush rising to her cheeks. I cleared my throat, smiling, and returned to my work, though my heartbeat lingered in the quiet of the room. We fell into an easy rhythm. I focused on the mechanical work, she made small observations, often leaning in slightly to point out a detail. Every brush of her hand, every subtle movement closer felt deliberate and electric, though either of us spoke about it. There was warmth in her presence, soft and steady, a human kind of heat that made the room feel smaller and more intimate than it really was. Her laughter punctuated the silence at one point, a soft, melodic sound that echoed in the warm room. I caught myself glancing at her mid-laugh, noticing the slight crinkle at the corners of her eyes, the gentle way her shoulders relaxed. It was a momentary glimpse of vulnerability, layered with confidence, and it tugged at something inside me I wasn't yet ready to name. I offered a casual joke about the stubborn screws, and she chuckled, her hand brushing mine again as she reached for a nearby tool to hand it to me. That small, intentional contact carried weight, a shared awareness, a spark of something unspoken but deeply felt. By the time the AC was fully operational, the room had transformed from a simple service call into a space charged with quiet, unspoken connection. I packed my tools slowly, reluctant to leave, while she lingered, subtly prolonging the moment. Romantic cues, accidental, fleeting touches that feel significant. Playful, intimate teasing that builds rapport. Lingering glances and awareness of each other's presence. Emotional tension growing naturally, setting the stage for deeper connection. Emotional goal: deepen emotional intimacy and vulnerability, establish trust and curiosity beyond physical attraction. Narrative and sensory detail: by the time the AC was humming steadily, the oppressive heat of the afternoon had softened, leaving a warm, almost lazy calm in the room. I was ready to pack up my tools, but she surprised me. "Would you like to have some coffee before you go?" she asked, her tone casual but tinged with something softer, almost inviting. I hesitated, only briefly, before nodding. There was a rhythm in her voice that made me want to accept, a subtle warmth that promised conversation beyond the ordinary. We moved to the kitchen, a bright, sunlit space with wooden floors and open windows letting in a soft breeze. She busied herself at the coffee maker, and I noticed the way she moved, deliberate, unhurried, almost meditative. The faint aroma of freshly ground beans filled the air, mixing with the subtle scent of her perfume, sweet but understated. We sat at the small kitchen table, steaming mugs in front of us. Initially, our conversation was casual, idle chatter about the weather, the quirks of old AC units, small anecdotes from work. But gradually, the words opened up, peeling away layers of guardedness. She spoke of past regrets with a wistful smile, of challenges she had faced alone, and the unexpected lessons she had learned along the way. I listened, genuinely attentive, and in turn shared some of my own experiences, the small heartbreaks, the moments of doubt, the little triumphs that had shaped me. There was a comfortable vulnerability in the exchange, a quiet sense that neither of us needed to impress the other, just to be seen. As the conversation deepened, our bodies subtly shifted closer. I noticed her hands brushing over the rim of her mug, fingers occasionally grazing mine. Each accidental touch sent a warm pulse through me, soft and electric. When I laughed at a story she told, she leaned slightly forward, her shoulder brushing mine. It was intimate without pretense, a delicate dance of proximity and awareness. The kitchen itself became a cocoon of sorts, the soft light, the quiet hum of distant traffic, the mingling sense of coffee and afternoon warmth. Every glance, every small gesture carried weight. She rested her chin on her hand for a moment, eyes thoughtful, and I found myself noticing the subtle curve of her smile, the way her presence filled the space with calm confidence. There was a long pause between us at one point, filled with silence rather than discomfort. I realized how much I wanted to hear her voice again, to see her reaction to even the smallest comments. It was magnetic, and it left me quietly aware of how different this connection felt from anything I had known before. Romantic cues, gentle, lingering touches through casual gestures, mugs, shoulders. Shared vulnerability through conversation. Emotional intimacy building alongside subtle physical awareness. Pauses and silences that feel meaningful, charged with unspoken tension. By the time I left her kitchen, it wasn't just the AC that had been fixed. Something unspoken had shifted between us, a quiet heat rising beneath polite smiles and measured words. Emotional goal, heightened emotional tension and mutual dependence through shared circumstances, increasing physical and emotional closeness subtly. Narrative and sensory detail. I was about to leave when the first fat drops of rain hit the windows. A sudden storm rolled in, unexpected and insistent, and the gentle hum of the AC was soon drowned out by the rhythmic patter of rain against the roof. She glanced out the window, a small sigh escaping her lips, and I could see the faint worry behind her composed exterior. "It looks like it's going to pour," she said, a hint of amusement in her tone, though her brow was slightly furrowed. "I guess you're stuck here for a bit." I offered a reassuring smile, but inside, I felt a flicker of excitement. The storm was inconvenient, yes, but it had a way of shrinking the world down to just the two of us. I followed her into the living room, where she suggested moving a few things out of the way to prevent the rain from dripping onto the floor. As we worked together, the closeness of the small space became more noticeable. Every time I reached for a box, her hand would brush against mine. Every time she passed a folded blanket, our shoulders would collide briefly. There was no awkwardness, just a gentle awareness, a recognition of each other's presence that sent an unspoken charge between us. The rain outside provided a perfect soundtrack. Its steady rhythm made the room feel insulated, almost like we were in our own quiet world. The scent of wet earth drifted through the open windows, mingling with the faint perfume lingering around her, and it created an oddly comforting warmth. At one point, she bent down to adjust a rug near the window, and I found myself instinctively leaning a little closer to help. Our knees brushed, a fleeting contact, and we both froze for a second, laughing softly at the moment. She straightened, eyes meeting mine, and there was a tiny, shared smile, a silent acknowledgement of the tension that had been quietly building since the AC call. Later, when I picked up a small puddle forming near the sliding door, she handed me a towel, and our fingers lingered on it together for a moment too long. I noticed her warmth, her subtle body language, the way she leaned slightly toward me, her gaze flickering down at our hands before meeting mine again. That simple touch felt heavier than anything we had shared before, charged with possibility yet still safe, still restrained. By the time the storm began to ease, neither of us wanted to break the spell. There was an intimacy in the shared effort, the accidental touches, and the quiet laughter over minor mishaps. We had moved from polite strangers to something unspoken, something hovering just beneath the surface, as natural as the rainstorm itself. Romantic cues, accidental touches and brief physical closeness. Shared laughter and playful energy that lowers emotional barriers. The storm as a metaphor for emotional release and growing tension. Awareness of each other's presence deepening the slow burn connection. As I finally gathered my tools to leave, the storm still dripping softly outside, I realized that this ordinary service call had transformed into something quietly extraordinary, a moment neither of us would forget. Emotional goal, explore internal conflict, hesitation, and longing, highlighting the tension between desire and social/emotional considerations. Narrative and sensory detail. I left her house that evening with the AC humming steadily behind me, but it wasn't just the heat of the summer that lingered. It was the warmth of her presence, tucked quietly into my chest. Every detail replayed in my mind, the subtle curve of her smile, the soft sound of her laughter, the way her hand had brushed mine while handing me a towel during the rain. Normally, a workday ended when I closed the truck door, but today, the work lingered, and so did she. Driving home, I found my mind wandering back to the little moments, the weight of her gaze, the gentle sway of her hair as she leaned over to point out a detail on the AC unit, the quiet pause in conversation when our eyes met and neither of us looked away. Each memory brought a pang of something I couldn't yet name. Part of me wanted to return, to linger just a little longer in that closeness, but another part hesitated. She was older than me, elegant and composed, a woman whose life experience clearly outweighed mine. I worried about overstepping, about the invisible boundaries drawn by age, by circumstance, by unspoken expectations. And yet, the hesitation only made the desire sharper, a quiet, simmering pull that I couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, she was likely wrestling with her own thoughts. I imagined her in the living room, the soft evening light spilling across the wooden floors, her fingers idly tracing the rim of the coffee mug I had left behind. Would she think of me the way I couldn't stop thinking of her? Did she feel the same electric warmth in those brief touches, the same spark of curiosity in our long glances? The evening stretched, and I found myself checking my phone, half expecting a message from her, a simple text to continue the connection. Yet nothing came. The silence was not painful exactly, but it carried weight, a reminder that the slow-burn tension between us was real, and that crossing the line, even in thought, came with unspoken risk. In the quiet of my apartment, I replayed the day once more. I remembered the rainstorm, the accidental brush of her knees against mine, the warmth of her shoulder near mine as we worked together. Each memory was a thread pulling me closer, threading a tapestry of longing that both thrilled and unsettled me. And yet, beneath the desire, there was a quiet respect, a realization that whatever was building between us had to be approached with care. Age, life experience, social expectations, these were all invisible walls, and I wasn't sure how or when to cross them. The tension was exquisite, frustrating, and compelling all at once. Romantic cues, emotional tension without physical contact. Internal longing and reflection creating depth. Awareness of social/emotional boundaries heightening the stakes. Memories of subtle touches and shared moments fueling anticipation. By the time night fell, one thing was certain: the connection we shared was no fleeting spark. It was slow, smoldering, and complicated, and I couldn't stop thinking about what might happen next. Emotional goal: build the emotional climax of the story, highlighting growing intimacy, subtle physical closeness, and mutual attraction without crossing boundaries. Narrative and sensory detail: I returned the next afternoon, ostensibly for a follow-up check on the AC. The heat outside pressed against the city streets, but stepping into her home, it felt different this time, warmer, but in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. She was there, naturally poised, moving about her living room with that same calm grace that had captivated me from the start. "Back so soon?" she asked, eyes sparkling with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Her voice carried the faintest trace of teasing, the kind that made my pulse quicken without a single word of provocation. I smiled, placing my toolkit down. "Just wanted to make sure everything's still running smoothly," I replied. But the truth was simpler. I wanted an excuse to see her again, to be near her, to feel the quiet connection that had been simmering since the first visit. As I inspected the unit, she moved closer to watch, leaning slightly on a side table. Each time she shifted, her presence brushed against my awareness, the soft scent of her perfume, the warmth of her shoulder near mine, the subtle sway of her hair catching the sunlight. I noticed how she angled her body in my direction, not overtly, but enough that our proximity became palpable. At one point, she handed me a small screwdriver, our fingers brushing for just a moment. That brief contact sent an electric warmth through me, lingering far longer than the touch itself. I looked up, and our eyes met, a shared awareness, a pause pregnant with unspoken words. Neither of us said anything, yet everything had been communicated. We found ourselves sitting down for a quick drink while I checked the final adjustments. She moved closer than necessary, her shoulder brushing mine, her hand occasionally grazing the edge of mine as we passed small items. Each touch was deliberate and gentle, creating a language of closeness that neither of us needed to put into words. Conversation flowed easily, moving from the AC to life stories, shared humor, and quiet reflections. Her laughter was soft and warm, wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. I realized how natural it felt to sit beside her, to match the rhythm of her words, the subtle cadence of her breathing. I became acutely aware of the small, intimate moments, a stray hair she tucked behind her ear, the gentle tilt of her head, the warmth of her shoulder resting near mine. As the visit neared its end, the tension between us had shifted, no longer just curiosity or admiration, but a simmering, unspoken connection. The storm of attraction that had been building since the first call had grown steady, comforting, and intoxicating. There was heat in the room, not from the summer air or the AC, but from the closeness we had nurtured, carefully and deliberately, over these brief encounters. Romantic cues, subtle, deliberate touches that convey closeness without crossing boundaries. Lingering glances and shared awareness creating a charged atmosphere. Physical proximity and body language amplifying emotional intimacy. Humor and shared conversation enhancing comfort and trust. By the time I packed up my tools, the air between us was heavy with possibility, but safe, warm, and profoundly tender. It was the kind of connection that didn't need words to be understood. The heat of attraction was undeniable, and yet perfectly restrained. Emotional goal: deliver a fulfilling, emotionally satisfying conclusion, resolve tension, affirm connection, and show mutual respect and intimacy. Narrative and sensory detail: it was late afternoon when I returned for what I knew would be our final check on the AC, at least for that week. The sunlight filtered through her curtains, bathing the room in a warm golden glow that softened the edges of everything it touched. She was there, naturally poised, standing by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The gentle warmth of the room mirrored the quiet anticipation I felt in my chest. She turned toward me with that calm, confident smile that had captivated me from the first moment. "Everything still works perfectly," she said, but her voice carried an unspoken invitation, an acknowledgement of the bond we'd quietly nurtured. We moved through the room together, casual gestures now carrying subtle meaning. She handed me a small tool to check the final details, our fingers brushing lightly. Each contact was deliberate yet gentle, a language of closeness we both understood. I noticed the warmth of her hand, the soft pulse that lingered in memory even as I held the tool. After the final inspection, we didn't rush to part ways. Instead, we lingered, letting the silence fill the space comfortably. She tilted her head, watching me with curiosity, and I realized that the hesitations and conflicts of the past days had softened, replaced by mutual understanding and quiet affection. The room felt intimate without pressure, the kind of closeness built over shared laughter, subtle touches, and honest conversations. "Thank you for everything," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. There was gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, a recognition of connection, trust, and perhaps something neither of us had dared name outright. I stepped a little closer, and she didn't move away. Instead, she leaned lightly against my shoulder, a gesture so natural it felt like a silent conversation. I felt her heartbeat, steady, reassuring, warm. In response, I let my hand rest gently on hers, a quiet affirmation of closeness. There was no urgency, no pressure, only a deep, mutual acknowledgement of the bond we had nurtured. We shared a quiet laugh over a small, mundane detail, the kind of laughter that comes when two people feel utterly at ease with one another. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I felt that all the hesitation, the unspoken tension, and the slow burn anticipation had found its resolution. We understood each other, fully and completely, without a single word needing to clarify what was already there. Sensory-rich details, warm golden light spilling across her living room, softening edges and shadows. The gentle warmth of her presence as she leans against me, heartbeat steady and calm. Fingers brushing naturally, small touches carrying emotional weight. Shared laughter and unhurried conversation making the room feel intimate and safe. Romantic cues, safe, tender physical affection, hand touches, leaning together. Emotional intimacy expressed through vulnerability and shared understanding. Acknowledgement of mutual desire without explicit actions. Sense of completion, tension resolved, connection affirmed. As I finally left her home, the AC humming quietly behind me, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of something slow, steady, and real. The heat that had been simmering since the first visit had found its place, not in urgency or passion, but in warmth, trust, and a connection that promised more than fleeting attraction. If this slow burn story warmed your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of unexpected connections, age gap romance, and heartfelt moments. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which moment between them gave you butterflies?